The hum of the alien transport ship was a constant, ominous presence, vibrating deep within Captain Ethan Cole's bones. He sat in a small, cramped cell with metal bars slick with moisture. A few fellow human prisoners huddled close by. Through the narrow viewports, he could see the swirling colors of the distant planet they were approaching. His jaw tightened at the sight. This wasn't Earth. The blue-green of home was long behind them, replaced by the vast alien world known only in whispers as Zorath Prime, the heart of the Zyrathi Empire. Ethan glanced at the other captives, noting their expressions of exhaustion, fear, and anger. Among them was Dr. Sarah Lewis, a biologist he had met just days before their capture. She had been working with a scientific team on a research vessel, studying new planets when the Zyrathi raiders had struck. Now, she sat quietly in the corner, her usually sharp eyes dulled by the gravity of their situation. The Zyrathi Empire was notorious. It thrived on conquest, subjugating species from across the galaxy to serve its vast machine of domination. From what little Cole had learned during the initial assault, the Zyrathi didn't just enslave their captives, they broke them. Whole civilizations had been turned into docile, obedient servants through a process of genetic tampering and mind control. Humanity, it seemed, was the next target. The transport shuddered as it breached the planet's atmosphere. Ethan tensed, gripping the cold metallic bench beneath him as the ship began its descent toward the surface of Zorath Prime. "They'll try to break us, you know," Sarah said, her voice low but steady. Her gaze remained fixed on the viewport, as though she were studying every detail of the alien world below. Ethan gave a grim nod. "They'll try." The ship touched down with a jarring thud. A series of clicks and hisses followed as the ship's doors were unsealed. Harsh alien voices barked commands in a guttural tongue. The humans exchanged nervous glances. Moments later, the doors slid open with a hydraulic groan, revealing the desolate landscape of the Zyrathi prison camp. As they were let out into the open, Ethan took in the full horror of their surroundings. The camp sprawled across the dark, ashen plains, enclosed by towering walls of polished black stone. The air was thick with humidity, a strange, acrid scent lingering like burnt metal. Overhead, the sky was a dismal shade of gray, occasionally streaked with flashes of lightning. There was no warmth here, only cold efficiency. The prisoners were herded toward a massive structure in the distance, a fortress-like complex where other captured species toiled under the watchful eyes of Zyrathi overseers. These creatures were tall and menacing, with elongated limbs, smooth obsidian skin, and faces that held no emotion, only the cold intent to dominate. As they passed rows of cages and enclosures, Ethan's attention was drawn to a series of massive pens, where hulking, beast-like creatures were kept. These animals were like nothing he had ever seen, large, quadrupedal creatures with sleek, muscular bodies and razor-sharp teeth. Their eyes glinted with intelligence, and their scales shimmered under the dim light, reflecting the dull gray of the planet's sky. "What are those?" one of the other humans whispered, fear creeping into his voice. "Local wildlife?" Sarah suggested, though there was an edge of doubt. Ethan narrowed his eyes, studying the creatures more closely. They were unlike any wild animal he had ever encountered. The creatures' movements were deliberate, calculated, as though they were more than just mindless predators. They seemed aware of themselves, of their surroundings, and perhaps most disturbingly, of the humans passing by. "We need to be careful," Ethan murmured, his gaze lingering on one particularly large beast, its golden eyes locked onto. "Something tells me those things are more than just animals." The group was led into the complex and shoved into separate cells, but the image of the beasts remained vivid in Ethan's mind. Hours passed, the tension building as they waited for what came next. In the cell next to his, Sarah paced, her sharp mind clearly racing. They needed to escape, he knew that much. The longer they stayed, the closer they'd get to being broken by the Zyrath, but any attempt had to be calculated. One wrong move could end them all. As the hours dragged on, they were subjected to the harshness of the camp. The Zyrathi guards were ruthless, providing minimal food and water, using fear to keep the prisoners in line. But beneath that, there was something else, a constant reminder that the humans were next in line to be processed. That night, as the alien moons rose in the sky, Ethan heard a low growl echo through the camp. He moved to the bars of his cell, peering out toward the distant beast enclosures. There, in the dim light, the massive creatures were restless. One in particular, a large lion-like beast with silver fur and glowing yellow eyes, paced back and forth, its gaze frequently lifting toward the human cells. "They don't like being caged either," Sarah said, suddenly appearing beside him. Ethan grunted in agreement. "Maybe we've got more in common with them than we think." "I've been watching them," Sarah said quietly. "They're intelligent. The Zyrathi might control them, but those creatures aren't just tools. They're something more. I think they might be like us." "Like us?" Sarah's gaze darkened. "Prisoners." A heavy silence fell between them. For the first time since their capture, Ethan felt a flicker of hope, however small. These creatures might be more than just captives, and if they were, perhaps they could help. But to turn that hope into action, they'd need to find a way to communicate, and time was running out. "Let's find out," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We need allies. And if those things can think for themselves, we're going to give them a reason to fight." In that moment, a plan began to form. An alliance between humans and beast might be their only chance at freedom. The next day, the prisoners were forced into grueling labor under the hot, oppressive atmosphere of Zorath Prime. Ethan and the others worked in silence, surrounded by the ever-watchful Zyrathi guards. The alien overseers, with their cold, expressionless faces, ensured no one stepped out of line. Despite the physical exhaustion, Ethan's mind was working furiously, formulating a plan to connect with the beasts. Throughout the day, his gaze kept drifting toward the enclosures that housed the massive creatures. He noticed that the Zyrathi maintained a certain distance from them, even though they used a combination of energy restraints and barriers to keep the beasts under control. Something about these animals made even the Zyrathi cautious. That night, as the prisoners were herded back into their cells, Ethan and Sarah exchanged a knowing glance. It was time to test their theory. After the lights dimmed and the camp fell into its eerie nighttime quiet, they waited until the guards were making their rounds. When the moment was right, Ethan signaled Sarah to begin. Sarah had always been quick with her hands, and over the course of the day, she'd managed to fashion a small tool from scraps they had found during their forced labor. Now she used it to quietly unlock the door to their cell. The faint click of the mechanism made Ethan's heart race, but when no guards came running, they knew it had worked. Slipping out of their cell, Ethan and Sarah moved silently through the shadowy corridors of the camp. The tension in the air was thick as they crept toward the beast enclosures. As they approached, the low growls and rustling of the creatures grew louder, sending a chill down their spines. When they reached the massive pens, Ethan peered through the bars and saw the large, lion-like beast that had caught his attention the night before. It was awake, its glowing yellow eyes fixated on him. For a moment, they stood there, locked in a silent stare, and Ethan felt a strange connection, an understanding that went beyond words. "We need to make contact," Sarah whispered. "But how?" Ethan scanned the area, searching for something they could use to communicate. The beasts were intelligent, he could feel it, but they needed a way to show the creatures that they were not enemies. Then, he remembered something from Earth's wilderness, an old survival trick used to calm wild animals. "I'll go first," Ethan said, stepping forward cautiously. He moved closer to the bars of the pen, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The massive beast tensed, its muscles rippling under its silver fur, but it didn't attack. Instead, it watched him, curious but cautious. Ethan knelt down, lowering his gaze slightly, a non-threatening gesture in the animal kingdom. The beast growled softly, its eyes never leaving him. Ethan remained still, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of food he had saved from their meager rations. Holding it out in front of him, he waited. For what felt like an eternity, the beast remained motionless, its golden eyes gleaming in the darkness. Then, with surprising grace, it stepped forward, sniffing the air cautiously. Ethan held his breath as the creature leaned in, its powerful jaws mere inches from his hand. Then, with a swift motion, it took the food, retreating slightly to chew. "That's a good sign," Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's not attacking." Ethan nodded, relief flooding through him. The first step had been taken, but there was still more to do. They needed to earn the creature's trust, and fast. The Zyrathi would soon discover they had left their cells, and when they did, there would be no second chances. They spent the next hour cautiously feeding the beast and its companions, each movement slow and deliberate. The other creatures in the enclosure began to take notice, some of them stepping closer, their predatory instincts tempered by curiosity. One by one, they accepted the offerings, their once hostile postures softening. "These creatures are smarter than we thought," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with realization. "They're not just animals. They're thinking, calculating." Ethan was about to respond when the distant sound of footsteps echoed through the camp. His heart skipped a beat. The guards were coming. "We need to go," he said, rising quickly to his feet. But just as they were about to retreat, the large lion-like beast, the first to take Ethan's offering, stepped closer to the bars, its golden eyes glowing brightly in the darkness. It let out a low, rumbling growl, and Ethan felt a strange vibration in his chest, as if the beast was trying to communicate. Suddenly, the creature raised its head, its eyes shifting toward the camp's walls. It let out a sharp, guttural sound, and in the distance, Ethan heard something stir, a deep, rumbling growl from the other side of the camp. The ground trembled slightly as more beasts, hidden in the shadows, began to respond to the call. "They're organizing," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "They're planning something." Before they could fully grasp what was happening, the camp's alarm system blared to life. Red lights flashed, and the guards shouted in their guttural alien language. The beasts, now fully alert, began to roar, their powerful voices shaking the very ground beneath their feet. "We have to go, now!" Ethan urged, grabbing Sarah's arm. They sprinted back toward their cell, ducking into the shadows just as the guards rushed past. The camp was in chaos. The beasts were no longer passive captives. They were ready to fight. As Ethan and Sarah slipped back into their cell, panting and covered in sweat, they shared a glance. The bond between human and beast had been forged, and something much larger was on the horizon. The beasts weren't just prisoners, they were potential allies, and they had just called for war. This was the beginning of their rebellion. The next few days were filled with tension and secrecy. Ethan and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their connection with the beasts had sparked something larger than they'd anticipated. Each night, after their grueling shifts, they returned to the beast pens, growing bolder with every visit. Word spread among the other prisoners, and soon a few brave souls joined them. Everyone knew that if the Zirathi caught them, the punishment would be brutal. But hope had bloomed, and it was contagious. Ethan spent hours each night studying the beasts. They weren't all the same species. Some were feline-like, others more reptilian, with tough hides and sharp claws. Yet they shared a common intelligence that went beyond instinct. It was as if they were waiting for something, biding their time in captivity. One night, as Ethan and Sarah fed the largest of the beasts, whom they had named Kalor, a strange moment passed between them. Kalor, with his shimmering silver fur and glowing yellow eyes, had become their primary contact among the creatures. He seemed to understand Ethan's every movement, every word, even though the communication was silent. This time, though, Kalor did something unexpected. He leaned closer to Ethan and touched his massive head to Ethan's hand. It wasn't just a gesture of trust. The moment their skin touched, Ethan felt a rush of images, flashes of thoughts that weren't his own. He saw vast fields where Kalor and his kin roamed free, then the harsh metallic cages of the Zirathi, and finally, a deep, simmering anger. Kalor was showing him something, a plea for freedom. The beasts were ready to fight, but they needed a signal, a leader. Ethan stumbled back, breathless. He's trying to communicate with me, he whispered to Sarah, his voice shaking with awe. Sarah's eyes widened. What do you mean? How? I don't know, Ethan said, still reeling from the mental connection. But it's clear. They want out, and they need our help. Sarah crouched beside him, watching as the other beasts stirred, sensing the growing bond between Ethan and Kalor. If they're ready to fight, then so are we. We just need to figure out how to coordinate it. The next day, they began making subtle preparations. Ethan and Sarah discreetly scouted the camp, mapping out the Zirathi patrols and guard rotations. They couldn't afford to act without a plan. The camp was heavily fortified, and while the beasts were strong, they couldn't break through the energy shields alone. It would take a coordinated attack, one that involved both the humans and the beasts. In the background, tensions among the prisoners were rising. The Zirathi had become suspicious, sensing the unrest, though they couldn't yet pinpoint its source. Guards increased their patrols, and the punishment for disobedience grew harsher. But instead of breaking the human spirits, the brutality only fueled their resolve. They were more determined than ever to escape. One evening, as Ethan and Sarah met with the other prisoners in the shadows of their cell, Ethan laid out the plan. "We strike at dawn in 2 days," he whispered. "The beasts will break out first. Kalor and the others will create chaos, and in the confusion, we'll take down the energy shields." Sarah nodded. "Once the shields are down, we'll have to move fast. We'll need weapons, whatever we can find or make, and we'll need to be ready for the Zirathi reinforcements." The prisoners exchanged nervous glances, but there was a spark of hope in their eyes. They had all seen what Ethan had done, how he had forged a bond with the beasts. It was something none of them could have imagined a few weeks ago. But now, it was their best chance at survival. "I know it sounds impossible," Ethan said, sensing their hesitation. "But the Zirathi have underestimated us from the beginning. They think we're weak because we're humans, because we're not from this world. But we've adapted, we've learned their weaknesses, and now we've got something they don't." He paused, looking at each of them. "We've got allies." That night, they made their final preparations. The human prisoners quietly fashioned weapons from the tools they'd been forced to use during their labor: makeshift knives, clubs, and spears. Sarah, with her sharp engineering skills, worked on a device to disable the camp's energy grid. It was risky, but it was their only chance. As the final night before the attack approached, Ethan returned to the beast pens one last time. Kalor and the other creatures were restless, pacing in their enclosures. Ethan knelt beside the pen, pressing his hand against the bars. Kalor stepped forward, placing his massive paw against Ethan's hand. "We're doing this tomorrow," Ethan whispered, meeting the beast's glowing eyes. "Are you ready?" Kalor let out a deep, rumbling growl, low and confident. The other beasts echoed the sound, their collective voices shaking the ground beneath them. Ethan stood, a sense of calm washing over him. They weren't alone anymore. The bond between human and beast was real, and it was powerful. Together, they would break their chains. The dawn of their rebellion was approaching, and the alien empire would soon learn that their human captives were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The night passed in tense silence, with both humans and beasts awaiting the signal. Ethan knew that the next day would either bring their freedom or their deaths, but either way, they were done being prey. The tables were about to turn, and when they did, the Zirathi would never see it coming. As the first rays of the alien planet's sun crept over the horizon, a stillness settled over the camp. The usual hum of machinery and the rhythmic stomp of Zirathi patrols were almost eerily absent. It was as if the world was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Hidden in the shadows of their cages and quarters, both human prisoners and the beasts lay in wait, nerves taut with anticipation. Ethan, crouched behind a stack of crates near the beast pens, scanned the camp one last time. The energy grid still hummed with the familiar glow of the shield, but Sarah had assured him that she could bring it down. She had rigged a makeshift electromagnetic disruptor using scavenged alien tech, and now it rested in her hands like a lifeline. All that was left was to trigger the chain of events that would plunge the camp into chaos. Sarah joined him, her expression focused and calm, but beneath that calm, Ethan saw the fire of determination. "You ready?" she whispered, holding up the device. Ethan nodded. "Let's light this fuse." With a swift motion, Sarah activated the disruptor. For a moment, nothing happened, and doubt flickered through the air like a shadow. Then, with a sudden jolt, the hum of the energy shields flicked, the barrier around the camp faltering, then dimming entirely. The shield was down. Ethan sprang into action, whistling a sharp, commanding signal. From within the pens, Kaylor roared in response, a deep, earth-shaking sound that resonated through the camp. The other beasts answered in kind, their roars rising in a deafening chorus. Metal bars groaned as Kaylor and the beasts launched themselves against their cages, breaking free with brute force. Their claws shredded the walls of their pens as they poured out into the camp, a wave of raw power and fury. The Zirathi guards, stunned by the sudden loss of their shield and the unexpected onslaught, scrambled to react, but it was too late. The beasts were already upon them, tearing through the camp with terrifying speed. Kaylor led the charge, his massive form crashing into a group of guards, sending them flying like rag dolls. Ethan and Sarah dashed toward the weapons cache, where a small group of human prisoners had gathered, already arming themselves with scavenged rifles and tools. "The shield's down. Spread out and take out the remaining guards," Ethan ordered, grabbing a rifle and a blade. "We have to keep them disorganized." The humans, now fully awake to the opportunity before them, surged forward with newfound courage. For too long they had been oppressed, beaten, and used as laborers. But today, they fought back, not as prisoners, but as warriors. Each one knew that this was a fight for their lives, for their future. Ethan moved with practiced precision through the chaos. He fired into the fray, picking off Zirathi guards who tried to regroup. His heart raced, adrenaline pumping, but there was a sense of clarity in the chaos. This was what they had been building toward. Meanwhile, Sarah stayed close to the device, ensuring it continued to disrupt the camp's energy grid. The Zirathi would no doubt try to restore power, and if the shields went back up, the rebellion would be crushed. She had to hold the line. In the heart of the camp, Kaylor and the other beasts tore through the remaining defenses. Their coordination with the humans was eerie, as if they had been born to fight together. Ethan saw Kaylor leap onto a Zirathi hovercraft, ripping the pilot from his seat and sending the vehicle crashing into the ground in a fiery explosion. As the battle raged, Ethan found himself face to face with one of the Zirathi commanders. The alien was tall, with gleaming armor and cold, calculating eyes. It wielded a plasma weapon that crackled with energy. Ethan raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the commander knocked it from his hands with a swift blow. Ethan stumbled back, reaching for his blade, but the commander was fast. Too fast. It swung the plasma weapon down, and Ethan barely rolled out of the way in time, the ground scorching where the weapon struck. The commander sneered, speaking in its guttural alien tongue. "You think you can defeat us, human? You are nothing. You will always be prey." Ethan gritted his teeth, feeling the weight of those words. The Zirathi had always viewed humans as lesser beings, as creatures to be dominated and controlled. But today, that narrative was changing. Today, they were fighting back. With a surge of determination, Ethan lunged at the commander. They clashed, Ethan's blade against the alien's plasma weapon. Sparks flew as their weapons met, but Ethan refused to back down. He fought with everything he had, drawing on every bit of training and instinct he possessed. He had to win, for Sarah, for the other prisoners, for Kaylor and the beasts who had thrown their lot in with them. Suddenly, a roar echoed through the camp, a roar of fury and defiance. Kaylor charged toward them, barreling through the melee. In a split second, the massive beast leaped into the fray, knocking the commander aside with a devastating swipe of his claws. The Zirathi commander crumpled to the ground, his weapon shattered. Ethan stood panting, watching as Kaylor growled down at the defeated commander. The alien, once so powerful and terrifying, now looked small and broken. Ethan knelt beside him, gripping his blade tightly. "You underestimated us," Ethan said coldly. "You underestimated all of us." With a final strike, he ended the commander's reign. As the battle began to wind down, The remaining Zarathi forces were routed. Some fled, abandoning the camp in disarray, while others were taken down by the human-beast alliance. The once imposing prison camp now lay in ruins, smoldering and broken. Ethan stood among the debris, breathing heavily. He looked up to see Sarah approaching, her face streaked with dirt, but alive with triumph. Kalor and the other beasts gathered around them, their once caged forms now free and powerful. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper, as if she couldn't quite believe it herself. Ethan nodded, resting a hand on Kalor's massive side. "We did, but this is just the beginning." The humans were free, but the Zarathi Empire was vast and powerful. Today, they had struck a blow, but tomorrow would bring new challenges. Still, they had one thing the Zarathi didn't, a bond that could not be broken. Together, human and beast, they would forge a new future. The aftermath of the battle was a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. As the dust settled and the smoke from the burning remnants of the Zarathi camp drifted into the alien sky, the human prisoners stood in awe of what they had accomplished. The oppressive weight of captivity was gone, replaced by the palpable sense of freedom that had once seemed impossible. Ethan, Sarah, and the other humans gathered together in the central courtyard, where only hours ago they had been mere slaves to an empire that saw them as nothing more than disposable tools. The alien beasts, now free and victorious, stood alongside the humans, their hulking forms casting long shadows in the dim light. Kalor, the largest and most fearsome of the creatures, approached Ethan with a low, rumbling growl, not one of menace, but of recognition. The bond between them had grown deeper than either could have anticipated. Ethan felt an undeniable connection to Kalor, a creature who had once been feared as nothing more than a mindless beast, but had now become a powerful ally and protector. "I still can't believe it," Sarah said, her voice filled with both relief and wonder as she joined Ethan, watching the massive beasts in the distance. "We've done what nobody thought was possible." Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow and exhaled, glancing at the ruins of the camp. "We survived," he replied. "But more than that, we've shown them we're not just prey." As the remaining humans tended to the wounded and gathered what supplies they could from the wreckage, a sense of urgency began to settle in. Though they had claimed victory here, they knew this was only the beginning. The Zarathi were an empire, and the humans had just toppled a small outpost. It wouldn't be long before the alien overlord sent reinforcements to investigate, and this time, they would be prepared for resistance. "We have to keep moving," Ethan said, voicing what everyone already knew. "The Zarathi will come looking for us, and when they do, we need to be long gone." Sarah nodded, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "But we don't have to run anymore, not like before. We're stronger now." Ethan looked at the alien beasts standing proudly in the clearing. She was right. Their victory today hadn't just been about escaping. It had been about forming something new, something stronger than the sum of its parts. The Zarathi would never expect an alliance between humans and the native creatures of this world. They would never see the true strength that came from such a bond. A sudden movement at the edge of the camp caught Ethan's eye. A group of native aliens emerged from the jungle, their forms humanoid but distinctly different from both the humans and the Zarathi. Their skin was a mottled, dark hue, and their eyes gleamed with intelligence and caution as they approached. It was clear they had been watching the battle from a distance, waiting to see the outcome before making themselves known. Ethan raised a hand in a gesture of peace as they came closer. Sarah stood beside him, doing the same, and soon the other humans followed suit. The lead native, a tall figure draped in flowing vine-like garments, stepped forward, their eyes locking with Ethan's. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the native spoke in a soft, melodic tone, though the meaning was clear. "You have fought well, human." Ethan was momentarily taken aback, but he quickly composed himself. "We had no choice," he replied. "We were prisoners, but we refused to stay that way." The native leader nodded slowly, their gaze shifting to Kalor and the other beasts. "Your bond with the children of the wild is unexpected. It has been many cycles since anyone has earned their trust." Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm but respectful. "We didn't plan for this. We just wanted to survive, but we found each other, and together, we were strong." The native leader's expression softened slightly. "You have proven yourselves worthy. The Zarathi have long taken what is not theirs. They have enslaved many of our kind, as they have enslaved yours. But today, you have shown us that perhaps we are not alone in this fight." Ethan felt a surge of hope at the native's words. This was more than just a simple encounter. This was the beginning of something larger. "We can help each other," he said, the words coming out with more conviction than he had expected. "We want to free ourselves from the Zarathi's grip. If we stand together, we can push them back." The native leader considered his words carefully before nodding. "Perhaps, but such an alliance comes with risk. The Zarathi will not take your defiance lightly." "We're not afraid of them," Sarah interjected, her voice filled with defiance. "Not anymore." The native leader smiled faintly. "Then perhaps we have much to discuss. Come, there is much to prepare if we are to stand against the Zarath." Ethan exchanged a glance with Sarah, both of them realizing the weight of what was happening. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were forming alliances, gathering strength, and preparing for a much larger war. As the humans began to follow the natives into the jungle, Kalor and the other beasts fell into step beside them, their presence a comforting reminder of the powerful bond that had been forged in the heat of battle. Ethan placed a hand on Kalor's massive flank, feeling the warmth of the creature's scales under his palm. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore," Ethan said quietly to Sarah as they walked. "This is bigger than us." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the dense foliage around them. "We've started something we can't stop, but I'd rather die fighting than live as a slave." Ethan couldn't help but smile at her words. The fear that had once gripped them all was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. They had been hunted, imprisoned, and underestimated, but now they were free, and they would make sure the Zarathi never forgot what happened when humans fought back. As they disappeared into the jungle, the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the alien landscape. A new chapter had begun. Together, human, beast, and alien, they would fight for their freedom and build a future free from tyranny. This was no longer just a rebellion. This was a war for survival, and they were ready to turn the tables on their captors.